Abbott, and I'm Chairman of the Australian SMSF Members Association, or better known as ASMA. Today we're going to be talking about the 8 benefits of self-managed superannuation funds. For many people, self-managed super funds are an enigma. They don't really understand what they're about, they don't understand the benefits. They may read an article in a magazine, they might see a newspaper article or see something pop up at budget time and wonder what it's all about. Many people are quite comfortable sitting in industry funds and also retail superannuation funds. In fact, superannuation to me is probably really God's gift to saving, particularly if you're looking at saving for retirement. But when it comes down to self-managed super funds, they're a lot different. They're not just simple, plain vanilla retail and industry funds, they have a little bit more. And today I want to take you through the 8 benefits of a self-managed super fund. Now, first off, I want to give a bit of a warning here for you, is that if you are in a retail fund or an industry fund, you must really be careful and take a lot of time to work out whether you do want to jump out on your own. Effectively, you are on your own in a self-managed super fund, and really take control of your own superannuation. If you're someone who's sort of laid back, really not interested in your retirement, don't want to make investments yourself, you're really happy going along with the flow, then really a retail or industry-based fund is really up your alley. Don't make the step of going through a self-managed super fund. But for those who want a bit more excitement, those who want to really press ahead and become a self-funded retiree, really make the most of the opportunities, I suggest that a self-managed super fund may well be for you. So let's go through the 8 benefits. First, and probably the most important for me, is engagement. Once you make that line, or you step across that line in terms of superannuation, you decide to leave behind the, paternalistic industry funds and the retail super funds, you move beyond and actually start to take control of not only your super, as you'll see a little bit later on when I talk about it, but your family's superannuation. Once you move beyond that line, you need to become engaged. Unfortunately, many people inside self-managed super funds, and again, this is the risk that I was talking about, many people inside self-managed super funds have large cash holdings. They've got those large cash holdings because they've, more importantly, decided to get away from retail industry funds and simply go into self-managed. They'd probably be better off staying inside retail industry funds just in a cash balance. But from our perspective, if you move over and you become engaged in your self-managed super funds, you need to start to choose, what stocks am I going to go? If I'm going to go into shares, what managed funds am I going to choose? Am I going to invest in property? Am I going to borrow to buy a property? Am I going to buy a property for my business premises or my business and then lease it back to my business? There's a lot of opportunities. Which members of my fund am I going to bring in? My family am I going to bring into this fund? Am I going to bring my children in? Am I going to bring my parents in? Am I going to bring my daughters or sons-in-law into the fund? Bearing in mind that with a self-managed super fund you can only have 4 members. So the first one is getting engaged. One of the most important things about engagement is then to become knowledgeable in what is a self-managed super fund. To put it simply, and there's a lot of information, in fact, go onto the ATO website or certainly go to the ASMA website, www.smsfmembers.com, and have a look at all the information around self-managed super funds there. From that perspective, self-managed super fund is a fund where you can have up to 4 members only, but all members must be trustees of that fund. Or the better way of setting it up is to actually have a corporate trustee, a company that stands the test of time. With that company, all members must then be directors, unless they're under 18, of course, and in that instance then essentially what we do is mum or dad who have the kids inside that fund who are still members, they simply act on their behalf. So we've got this 4-member fund. Once you're in there, you're all directors, you're all trustees, you're in there to really start to engage and start to make decisions about your retirement, making decisions about your long-term future. Because if you have a look at all the statistics, that a simple 1 or 2% extra return over a 30-40 year period can make a huge difference to your retirement income. And let's face it, at the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure that we live long and live gracefully in our retirement. The more that we have in our nest egg, the less we have to worry about our healthcare, the less we have to worry about handouts from government. Because as time goes on, and we're already starting to see this in Australia, things are getting a lot more constrained. Healthcare costs are going up. It's a lot harder to afford decent aged care. So really, start to get engaged. The first rule, if you're in a self-managed super fund, you need to be engaged with your self-managed super fund. The second rule, probably to me, is the most important, and it comes down to investing. You've made the choice, you're becoming engaged. One of the most important things that a lot of people choose to go into a self-managed super fund is to choose their own investments. You see, over time, we're going to end up that where you work for someone, 12% of your salary is going to go into superannuation. More importantly, if you're self-employed, you can make contributions of potentially up to $25,000 or tax-deductible contributions, or if you're an executive, salary sacrifice of $25,000 each year. That money goes in. Now, if we've got this family super fund, which I'm going to talk about a little bit as my next benefit, if we've got this family super fund, we've set it up, we're going to have husband and wife or spouses together who can then put in $25,000 each with a salary sacrifice or personal deductible contributions, and that money, $50,000, must then be used. And this is where we start to work it. It's no good just sitting in cash. Cash is probably the most riskiest investment for you long-term in terms of your retirement. Cash barely keeps up with inflation. You need growth over the long term. A 40-year-old shouldn't be in cash. Even a 50-year-old shouldn't be in cash. They should be fully invested. Now here's the thing is, at the end of the day, it seems to me, unless you're a balanced investor, and that's generally if you go and see a professional investment strategist inside your self-managed super fund or a financial planner who'll balance the whole portfolio, you're either going to be one of two things. You're either going to be a share investor or a property investor. So if you're a share investor, then $50,000 will get you a long way to acquiring a really good parcel of shares each and every year. On the other hand, if you're a property investor, $50,000 isn't going to buy you part of a property. However, it can put you down, or can effectively be a strong deposit in order to acquire a property. Now that we can borrow to acquire property inside our self-managed superannuation fund. But notwithstanding that, we need to sit down and work out our investment choices. But a couple of rules here. Any investments in the fund you cannot use yourself. That's a breach of what we call the sole purpose test. You cannot use them yourself unless it's business real property. You know, property like a farm, property like your offices, property like a factory that you're actually going to be engaged in your business in. Otherwise, you can't use the assets of the fund yourself. You can't go and get a vintage car and start using it yourself. You can't then go and buy a property inside the fund and then live in it or put your kids in there, even if they pay market value rent. So that's really important. You can't use that investment yourself. You can't lend money to yourself. You can't lend money to a related party. So you just be very careful about that one. Just as an aside, certainly one of the traps and pitfalls of doing a self-managed super fund, it's great to be engaged, but there's a whole lot of different compliance issues, and you really need to make sure that you get strong, professional, strategic advice from either your accountant or a specialist SMSF lawyer or SMSF specialist advisor or a financial planner who has got the skills in this SMSF area. Now, that's the second benefit, which is making your choice of investments. Engagement first, then start to invest. The third one, and this is where I see that a lot of people make a mistake, is that they don't really start to bring their family in. If we're going to get engaged in there, we find that around about 70% of funds are effectively mum and dad funds. The children aren't inside the fund. More importantly, that gets a bit dangerous, that when mum or dad dies, that we end up with a one-member fund. That could be very dangerous, particularly if the remaining member ends up being in a position of losing their mental capacity. Who's going to run the fund then? You've got to, when you go down this process, you have to understand that the self-managed super funds go into perpetuity. The rules against perpetuity, which usually apply to trusts, don't apply to self-managed super funds. So when you set them up for multi-generations. And if you've got that in mind, then you start to think about, well, which members of my family will I bring in? Now, bearing in mind what I said before, how many members can a self-managed super fund have? That's right, you can only have 4 members, which means you have to be very, very focused on who's going to come into the fund. I would suggest you don't have daughters-in-law or sons-in-law, mainly because if there's a divorce, and let's face it, 50% of all marriages end up in divorce these days, and it also applies in the same instance if they're in de facto relationships, that effectively family lawyers from your son-in-law or your daughter-in-law, if they've been divorced, and they can start to devour or start to look at the insides of your self-managed super fund. So you don't want to basically have that. So you can bring your children in, but again, be careful about which children bring in.